It began with a single 911 call. The dispatcher answered, expecting another routine complaint. Instead, a woman's frightened voice came through the line. "My neighbor," she whispered. "I think he's a dangerous fugitive. He's been hiding something, and I think he has weapons inside his house." The dispatcher asked if she'd actually seen any weapons. There was a long pause. "No, but I know something isn't right." Those 7 words would change an entire neighborhood. Within minutes, the quiet streets of Maple Ridge Court erupted into chaos. Police cruisers raced in from every direction. Officers shut down the entrances to the neighborhood. Families were told to stay inside their homes. Parents rushed outside to call their children in from playing. Neighbors gathered behind windows, peeking through blinds as rumors spread faster than the flashing lights. Someone posted online that SWAT had arrived. Another claimed the serial killer had finally been found. Within half an hour, thousands of people were following the story online, and no one knew the truth. Then, a black helicopter appeared overhead. The sound of its rotors echoed across the neighborhood. More police vehicles arrived. Officers carrying rifles quietly took positions behind parked cars. Television news vans began pulling onto the street. Residents watched in disbelief. What could one man have done? No one expected what happened next. The front door slowly opened. A man stepped outside. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't running. He wasn't carrying a weapon. He simply raised his empty hands, looked at the officers, and calmly said, "I've been expecting someone to show up eventually." The officers looked at one another. That wasn't the response they expected. Within minutes, everything changed. By the end of the day, the man walked back into his home. The woman who called 911 didn't. She left the neighborhood in the back of a police cruiser. So how does someone go from reporting a dangerous criminal to becoming the focus of a criminal investigation herself? The answer starts 6 weeks earlier. Maple Ridge Court was the kind of neighborhood people dreamed about living in. Clean sidewalks, perfectly trimmed hedges, neighbors who waved as they walked their dogs, children riding bicycles until the streetlights flickered on each evening. It was peaceful, predictable, quiet. At least, it had been. There was one person who believed she was responsible for keeping it that way. Her name was Linda. Some people thought she was simply involved in the neighborhood. Others called her controlling. Linda preferred another word, observant. She noticed everything. If a garbage can stayed out an extra day, she knew. If an unfamiliar car parked on the street, she wrote down the license plate. If someone received multiple deliveries, she counted the boxes. She convinced herself she wasn't spying. She was protecting everyone. Most of the neighborhood had learned a simple rule. Smile, be polite, and never give Linda a reason to pay attention to you. For years, that strategy worked. Until the empty house next door was finally sold. A moving truck arrived just after sunrise. The new owner unloaded everything himself. No family, no friends, no moving company. Just one quiet man working from dawn until late afternoon. Whenever a neighbor introduced themselves, he smiled politely, shook their hand, and kept the conversation brief. "My name's Daniel. Nice to meet you." Nothing more, nothing less. To everyone else, Daniel seemed like the perfect neighbor. Quiet, respectful, private. But to Linda, privacy wasn't normal. Privacy meant secrets, and secrets needed to be uncovered. She didn't realize it then, but from the moment Daniel carried the final box through his front door, she had already taken the first step toward destroying her own life. The obsession. The first few days after Daniel moved in, nothing unusual happened. He kept his yard clean, his trash cans were always put away on time, he never played loud music, he never argued with anyone. If anything, he was the kind of neighbor most people hoped for. But that wasn't enough for Linda. To her, normal people didn't live like Daniel. Every morning he left before sunrise. Some days he returned before lunch. Other days he didn't come home until after midnight. His schedule never made sense. That was all Linda needed. She began keeping notes. Monday, left at 4:47 a.m., returned at 9:12 p.m. Tuesday, black SUV stopped for 3 minutes. No one got out. Wednesday, 2 packages delivered. Thursday, garage door open for exactly 46 seconds. Friday, no lights on all evening. Her notebook grew thicker by the day. The more she watched, the more convinced she became that she was uncovering something big. One afternoon, while watering her flowers near the property line, Linda saw Daniel carrying a large, sealed crate from his truck into the garage. There were no markings, no company logo, just a plain wooden box. She froze. What kind of person gets crates delivered to their house? She muttered. She immediately snapped several photos. By dinner, she had zoomed in on every inch of the images, convinced some hidden clue would reveal itself. There wasn't one, but that didn't stop her imagination. Soon, every ordinary event became suspicious. A delivery driver stayed too long, a work van parked in the driveway, a porch light turned on after midnight. Each harmless moment became another piece of the story she was writing in her own mind. The irony was, the rest of the neighborhood was beginning to like Daniel. One Saturday morning, an elderly couple struggled to lift heavy bags of mulch from their truck. Without being asked, Daniel walked over. Need a hand? Within minutes, he'd unloaded everything and carried it into their backyard. The following week, a teenager's bicycle chain snapped in the middle of the street. Daniel stopped his truck, grabbed a small toolkit, and repaired it in less than 5 minutes. He refused the offer of money. "It'll probably happen again," he said with a smile. "Keep the cash and buy a better chain." Little by little, the neighborhood began trusting him. Everyone except Linda. To her, kindness wasn't genuine. It was an act. A smart criminal would want everyone to like him, she told herself. So she watched even harder. She installed a new security camera facing the street, then another. Soon, every time Daniel came or went, she had footage. She clipped videos, saved screenshots, organized folders on her computer. She even created a binder labeled Daniel. Inside were printed photographs, vehicle descriptions, delivery dates, handwritten observations, and theories that became more unbelievable with every page. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. A white cargo van pulled into Daniel's driveway. It had no company logo, no phone number, no markings of any kind. 2 men stepped out. They opened the back doors, removed several heavy-looking cases, and carried them into the garage. The entire exchange lasted less than 4 minutes. Then the van disappeared. Linda had recorded every second. Her heart raced. "This is it," she whispered. "This is the proof I've been waiting for." She didn't know it yet, but those 4 minutes would trigger a chain of events that would soon bring dozens of police officers to Maple Ridge Court and expose far more than anyone expected. The call that changed everything. Linda couldn't sleep that night. She replayed the security footage over and over. The white cargo van, the heavy cases, the garage door closing. Every time she watched, she became more convinced he was right. By morning, she wasn't looking for the truth anymore. She was looking for proof that matched the story she'd already written in her head. Over the next several days, Daniel continued living exactly as he always had. He mowed his lawn, he waved to neighbors, he helped an elderly woman carry groceries into her house. He even spent an afternoon repairing a broken fence for a young family down the street. To everyone else, he looked like the kind of neighbor every community hoped for. But Linda saw something completely different. She noticed Daniel checking his mailbox before pulling into his driveway. He must be making sure no one's watching. She watched him leave early one morning wearing a baseball cap, trying to hide his face. When he carried a duffel bag into his garage, she convinced herself it contained weapons. The truth no longer mattered. Every ordinary action became suspicious because she'd already decided who Daniel was. Then came Friday. Just after 3 in the afternoon, a delivery truck stopped in front of Daniel's house. The driver unloaded one long cardboard box. Daniel signed for it, picked it up, and carried it straight into the garage. The garage door closed behind him. That was it. Linda grabbed her phone. Her hands were shaking. She stared at the screen for nearly a minute. Then she dialed. 911, what's your emergency? I think my neighbor is planning something. The dispatcher remained calm. What exactly have you seen? Linda hesitated. She hadn't actually seen a crime, but instead of saying that, she began connecting assumptions as if they were facts. He's been getting strange deliveries. There are people coming and going. I've seen large cases carried into his garage. He leaves at weird hours. I think he's hiding weapons. The dispatcher asked the obvious question. Have you actually seen any weapons? Another pause. No, but I know they're in there. What makes you believe that? Linda took a deep breath. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. I think he's a fugitive using a fake identity. The dispatcher immediately changed tone. Stay on the line. Within seconds, the information was being relayed across multiple law enforcement channels. Officers began responding. No one knew if the report was true, but no agency could afford to ignore it if it wasn't. The first patrol car arrived within minutes, then another, then another. Neighbors noticed the flashing lights almost immediately. Curtains opened, front doors cracked, phones came out. What happened? Whose house is it? Did someone get hurt? Social media lit up. Someone posted a blurry picture of the police cars. Within minutes, hundreds of comments appeared. People who had never been to Maple Ridge Court suddenly claimed to know exactly what was happening. It's a drug house. I heard it's a terrorist. My cousin said the FBI is coming. Rumors spread faster than facts ever could. More officers arrived. They quietly began securing the neighborhood. Roads were blocked. Families were asked to remain inside. The atmosphere changed from curiosity to fear. Standing behind her living room curtains, Linda watched everything unfold. She felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Finally, everyone was going to see that she'd been right all along. Across the street, Daniel looked through his front window. He saw the patrol cars. He saw officers taking positions. He slowly glanced toward Linda's house. For just a moment, their eyes met. Daniel didn't look angry. He didn't look frightened. He looked disappointed. Then, he quietly disappeared from the window. Outside, the sound of helicopter blades echoed in the distance. The situation was about to become far bigger than anyone on Maple Ridge Court could have imagined. The truth begins to surface. The helicopter settled into a slow circle above Maple Ridge Court. Its searchlight swept across rooftops as officers tightened the perimeter. More patrol cars arrived. Then an armored rescue vehicle rolled quietly onto the street. The entire neighborhood watched in stunned silence. Television reporters had gathered just outside the police line, broadcasting live. One headline read, "Possible armed fugitive surrounded in quiet neighborhood." Inside his home, Daniel wasn't barricading himself. He wasn't destroying evidence. He wasn't planning an escape. He was sitting calmly at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee. When the knock finally came, he simply stood, straightened his shirt, and walked to the front door. An officer called out, "Daniel, we'd like you to come outside with your hands visible." The front door opened. Daniel stepped onto the porch exactly as instructed. His hands were empty. He looked around at the dozens of officers surrounding his home. Then he calmly asked, "Who's in charge?" A lieutenant stepped forward. "I am." Daniel reached slowly into his back pocket. Every officer tensed. He stopped immediately. "My wallet," he said. "May I?" The lieutenant nodded. Daniel removed a leather credential holder and handed it over. The lieutenant opened it. His expression changed instantly. He looked back at Daniel, then looked at the credential again. He walked several steps away and spoke quietly into his radio. Within seconds, everything changed. The urgency disappeared. Officers lowered their rifles. The lieutenant made another phone call, then another. The armored vehicle stopped advancing. Several supervisors who had just arrived were suddenly pulled into a private conversation. No one outside the police line knew what had happened, but everyone could see something had changed. 20 minutes later, detectives entered Daniel's home, not to search it, to verify the information he had provided. Daniel calmly led them through every room, the garage, the office, the storage area, every package, every delivery, every shipment. Each one had paperwork, purchase records, shipping manifests, authorization forms. Everything matched. Nothing illegal, nothing hidden, nothing dangerous. One detective quietly turned to the lieutenant. "He's been completely cooperative." Another added, "Every single delivery checks out." Outside, Linda couldn't believe what she was seeing. Why wasn't anyone arresting him? Why weren't they carrying evidence boxes out of the house? Why were officers suddenly shaking his hand? Confusion slowly replaced confidence. Then, a detective walked across the street, not toward Daniel's house, toward Linda's. He knocked on her front door. Linda smiled as she opened it. "I have more evidence," she said before he could speak. The detective nodded politely. "I'm sure you do." He glanced at the thick binder she proudly carried into the living room. Photographs, printed emails, license plate numbers, dozens of pages of handwritten notes. At first, it looked impressive, until investigators started comparing the pages. Dates didn't match. Times changed from one page to another. Some photographs had been edited. Several captions described events that never actually occurred. One detective noticed something else. The metadata attached to a series of digital photos showed they had been altered before they were printed. Another discovered screenshots taken from neighborhood social media groups using accounts that belonged to different residents, except those residents later confirmed they had never made the post. Someone had been impersonating them. The room grew quiet. What had started as a report about Daniel was becoming an investigation into Linda, and investigators were beginning to realize this wasn't the first time. It wasn't even close. By the time the sun began to set, they had stopped asking questions about the quiet man next door. Now they were asking one question: how many innocent people had Linda accused before today? The investigation turns. As detectives dug deeper, a pattern began to emerge. At first, it looked like a neighborhood dispute. Then, it started looking like something much bigger. Investigators obtained search warrants for Linda's computer, phone, and cloud accounts. What they found stunned everyone. Folders, hundreds of them, each labeled with a neighbor's name. Inside were photographs, notes, vehicle descriptions, delivery schedules, screenshots from social media, and detailed timelines documenting people's daily routines. Some files went back nearly 5 years. She hadn't just been watching Daniel, she had been watching everyone. One detective quietly shook his head. This isn't observation, it's obsession. But that wasn't the most disturbing discovery. Forensic analysts found dozens of anonymous online accounts, different names, different profile pictures, different email addresses, yet every one of them traced back to Linda. She had spent years posing as other residents, starting arguments in neighborhood forums, posting false complaints, creating fake conversations, then reporting those conversations to the HOA as if they were real. She had manufactured conflict just so she could appear to solve it. The detectives kept digging. False parking complaints, fake animal abuse reports, fraudulent code enforcement tips, noise complaints filed while homeowners were on vacation, even anonymous letters mailed to employers accusing neighbors of misconduct. Nearly every complaint led back to the same source: Linda. The neighborhood hadn't been filled with difficult people. It had been living through years of manipulation from one person. Back outside, word was beginning to spread. Neighbors gathered in small groups. People compared stories. One family had received anonymous complaints every month after installing a basketball hoop. Another homeowner had nearly lost a promotion after someone falsely reported criminal activity to his employer. An elderly widow admitted she'd spent years believing the entire neighborhood disliked her. Now she realized many of those cruel letters had likely come from the same person. One by one, pieces of the puzzle began fitting together. The detective leading the investigation walked over to Daniel. "I owe you an apology." Daniel gave a small smile. "I figured sooner or later the truth would catch up." The detective frowned. "You suspected this?" Daniel nodded. "Not everything, just enough." He explained that from the day he moved in, he'd noticed someone photographing his property almost daily. Packages would mysteriously be moved. Neighbors repeated rumors that had never happened. Someone even attempted to access his mailbox on 2 separate occasions. He reported the suspicious activity months earlier, never imagining it would lead to this. As investigators reviewed neighborhood security footage from multiple homes, they uncovered even more. Linda had crossed onto private property, opened gates, looked through windows, moved objects before photographing them to make situations appear suspicious. Every new video answered one question and created another. By early evening, the detectives had enough evidence. They walked back across the street. Linda was still sitting confidently in her living room. She believed they were returning to thank her. Instead, the lead detective placed a folder on the coffee table. Inside were printed photographs, digital records, search warrant results, and statements from her own neighbors. He looked directly at her. "Linda, you're under arrest for filing a false police report, evidence tampering, identity-related fraud, and multiple counts connected to a pattern of harassment." For the first time all day, she couldn't find any words. As officers escorted her outside, the same cameras that had arrived expecting to film a dangerous fugitive captured something entirely different. The woman who claimed she had saved the neighborhood was now leaving it in handcuffs. Across the street, Daniel quietly watched from his front porch. He didn't celebrate, he didn't smile. He simply looked at the neighborhood, finally free from years of fear, and hoped everyone could begin trusting one another again. The final chapter of the story was still waiting to be written. The Karen who started a manhunt for herself. Part 6. The truth always finds its way. The investigation didn't end when Linda was arrested. In many ways, that was only the beginning. Over the next several weeks, detectives contacted dozens of current and former residents of Maple Ridge Court. One by one, the stories came pouring in. A retired schoolteacher revealed she'd been falsely accused of neglecting her property. A young couple admitted they almost sold their home after months of anonymous complaints and harassment. A local business owner described losing clients after someone anonymously accused him of operating illegally out of his garage. Every story seemed unrelated, until investigators compared the evidence. Different victims, different years, the same fingerprints, the same fake accounts, the same pattern. Every trail led back to one person, Linda. As the evidence mounted, prosecutors built a case showing years of calculated deception, false reporting, identity-related fraud, and harassment. Neighbors who had barely spoken to one another began comparing experiences and realizing they had all been manipulated into distrusting each other. For years, Linda hadn't just been watching the neighborhood, she had been controlling it, using fear, using rumors, using lies. And the saddest part? Most of her neighbors never questioned where those rumors came from. They simply believed them. Daniel finally understood why the neighborhood had felt so cold from the day he moved in. It wasn't because people were unfriendly. It was because they had spent years being taught not to trust each other. A few months later, Maple Ridge Court looked different. Not because the houses had changed, but because the people had. Families gathered outside again. Children rode their bikes until sunset. Neighbors shared barbecues. People who had once avoided one another now stopped to talk. Trust, little by little, returned. One Saturday morning, the neighborhood organized a block party. Tables lined the street. Children laughed. Music filled the air. As Daniel carried folding chairs into the cul-de-sac, several neighbors walked over. One of them smiled. "We owe you an apology." Another nodded. "We judged you before we knew you." Daniel smiled. "We all judge people sometimes." He paused for a moment before adding, "The important part is being willing to admit when we're wrong." The group stood quietly, not because there was nothing left to say, but because everyone knew he was right. Sometimes the most dangerous lies aren't the ones shouted the loudest. They're the ones repeated often enough that people stop asking if they're true. And sometimes, the person claiming to protect everyone is the very person everyone needs protection from. The police cars were gone. The helicopters had disappeared. The television cameras had moved on to the next breaking story. But Maple Ridge Court never forgot the lesson. A single false accusation had nearly destroyed an innocent man's life. The truth eventually prevailed, but not before an entire community learned how easily fear can spread when facts are replaced by assumptions. If this story reminds us of anything, it's this. Character is revealed by evidence, not rumors. Integrity is proven through actions, not accusations. And the truth may take longer to arrive, but it almost always catches up in the end. Thank you for watching LTL Karen Stories. If you enjoyed this story and want more dramatic tales of deception, accountability, and unexpected justice, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. Until next time, remember this. The loudest accusation isn't always the closest thing to the truth. Sometimes, the person pointing the finger is only trying to distract everyone from where the evidence really leads.